Welcome, traveler of the stars. Before we begin, don't forget to subscribe, like, and share this story, and drop a comment to keep the universe alive. Now, let's begin. In the infinite dark between galaxies, where light itself seemed to hold its breath, the silent collective had watched for 1,000 cycles. They were beings of crystalline thought, of perfect logic, of consciousness so refined it had transcended the messy limitations of flesh. And in all their eons of observation, they had never encountered anything quite like humanity. The first signals had reached them, 2725 Earth years ago, radio waves carrying the mathematical equivalent of a child's babble, yet with patterns that defied simple explanation. The collective had dispatched 3 observer spheres to the source, vessels of perfect geometric precision that moved through space without waste or sound. Captain Zelar of the sphere, Clarity, adjusted its sensory arrays, processing the incoming data with the dispassionate efficiency that defined its species. The target world, designated Sol Tree, but locally called Earth, was a chaotic anomaly in an otherwise orderly universe. The biological entities are irrational, Zelar transmitted to the collective network. They engage in self-destructive behaviors, while simultaneously creating works of profound mathematical elegance. They war against each other with devastating weapons, then compose symphonies that describe the very structure of space-time. The collective consensus formed almost instantly. Observe, analyze, do not engage until patterns are understood. For decades, the observers watched from the void, invisible to human technology. They witnessed humanity's contradictions, their capacity for both incredible cruelty and breathtaking compassion. They recorded the construction of cities that scraped against the sky, the launching of vessels that touched their moon, the transmission of signals that carried their voices into the cosmos. They are primitive, the collective concluded. Their technology is crude, their societies chaotic, their emotional responses illogical. Yet they persist. The first contact happened not by design but by accident. A human exploration vessel, the Odyssey, had ventured farther than any before, carrying a crew of 7 scientists, adventurers, dreamers. They were following a strange gravitational anomaly, unaware that it was the wake of an observer sphere. Commander Elena Rodriguez stood on the bridge of the Odyssey, her dark eyes reflecting the starfield beyond the viewport. At 42, she had dedicated her life to the stars, convinced that humanity was not alone in the universe. "Anything on long-range sensors?" she asked, her voice calm despite the thrum of anticipation in her chest. "Negative, Commander," replied Lieutenant James Chen, his fingers dancing across the console. "Just that weird gravitational ripple we've been tracking. It's changing shape." Elena leaned forward, her silver-streaked hair catching the dim bridge lighting. "How can gravity change shape?" "That's what I'd like to know," Chen muttered. In the observer sphere, Zelar processed the approaching vessel with growing interest. "They have detected our wake. Their technology is more advanced than initial assessments suggested." "Protocol?" inquired the collective. "Standard evasion procedure," Zelar responded. "We cannot risk contamination of our observation." But as the seer prepared to shift into non-observable space, something unexpected happened. The human vessel emitted a signal, not the random radio chatter they'd observed before, but a deliberate, structured transmission. The message was simple, a sequence of prime numbers followed by atomic weights of common elements, then a representation of DNA structure. It was the universal handshake of intelligence. Zelar froze. Protocol was clear. No contact with developing civilizations. Yet here was undeniable proof that humanity had reached out, deliberately seeking connection. "The transmission contains emotional content," Zelar reported. "Not just data, but hope, curiosity. They are not just announcing their intelligence, they are expressing their desire to connect." The collective processed this information for 3.7 seconds, an eternity for their kind. "The protocol stands. Evade. Continue observation." Zelar hesitated, a sensation so foreign it was nearly painful. Its crystalline consciousness, usually a perfect lattice of logic, now contained a single flaw: curiosity about these contradictory humans. "Executing evasion," Zelar transmitted, even as it prepared a response that would never be sent. On the Odyssey bridge, the crew watched as the gravitational anomaly vanished from their sensors. "It's gone," Chen said, disappointment evident in his voice. "Whatever it was, Elena Rodriguez didn't respond immediately. She stared at the empty space where something had been, her expression unreadable. Log the encounter, she finally said. All frequencies, all sensor readings, and send a report to Earth Command. We're not crazy. As the Odyssey turned back toward Earth, none of the crew knew that their encounter had been observed. Not just by the silent collective, but by another, one that had been watching humanity for far longer, with far different intentions. In the depths of Earth's oceans, something ancient stirred. It had heard the human signal, felt their reaching out, and now it was time to answer. The silent collective's observer spheres continued their surveillance, unaware that humanity was about to receive a very different kind of first contact, one that would change everything for humans and aliens alike. 3 years passed. The Odyssey's encounter became just another unexplained phenomenon in humanity's growing catalog of cosmic mysteries. Life continued on Earth. Wars were fought, treaties signed, children born, art created. Humanity remained blissfully unaware that they were being watched by two very different observers. The silent collective had expanded their surveillance to include not just Earth but humanity's growing presence in their solar system. They watched as humans established their first permanent base on Mars, as they mined asteroids for resources, as they sent probes deeper into space. They are expanding rapidly. Zeller reported, their population growth is unsustainable by our calculations, their resource consumption inefficient, yet they continue to advance. The collective consensus formed. Their trajectory leads to self-destruction within 200-300 Earth years. Intervention is illogical. Natural progression will resolve the anomaly. But Sylar had begun to question. In its decades of observation, it had recorded moments that defied the collective's cold logic. Humans risking their lives to save strangers, creating beauty in the midst of suffering, persisting against impossible odds. There is a variable we cannot quantify. Sylar transmitted something in their emotional responses that transcends logical analysis. Emotion is inefficient, the collective responded. It leads to irrational decisions, self-destruction, chaos. And yet, Sylar countered, it also leads to sacrifice, creation, persistence. Perhaps we are missing something fundamental about consciousness itself. The debate was interrupted by an alert from Earth's solar system. Something was happening that defied all previous observations. In the Mojave Desert, at the Deep Space Communications Array, Dr. Aris Thorne stared at his monitor in disbelief. At 67, with a career spanning 5 decades of searching for extraterrestrial intelligence, he had finally found something, and it was nothing like he'd expected. Maria, he called to his colleague, Dr. Maria Flores. You need to see this. Maria joined him, her coffee forgotten in her hand. What is it, Aris? Another pulsar with an unusual signature? No, Aris said, his voice barely above a whisper. It's structured, complex, and it's coming from everywhere at once. Maria leaned closer, her scientific skepticism warring with the evidence before her. The signal wasn't coming from a point in space. It was emanating from the Earth itself, from the oceans, the mountains, the very ground beneath their feet. That's impossible, she said. There's no natural phenomenon that could produce this. And no human technology either, Aris added. Look at the complexity, the mathematical structure. It's elegant. For days, scientists worldwide struggled to understand the phenomenon. The signal grew stronger, more complex, revealing layers of information that humanity was just beginning to decode. In the observer sphere, Zeller processed these developments with growing alarm. The signal is biological in origin. It emanates from Earth's biosphere itself. It is communicated. With whom? The collective inquired. With humanity, Zilla responded. And with us. The silent collective had never encountered anything like it. A planetary consciousness, ancient and vast, that had been dormant until humanity reached a certain threshold of development. It is warning them. Sylar transmitted as it decoded more of the signal, warning them about us, about our observation, and about something else, something coming. The collective processed this revelation was something approaching fear, an emotion they had believed themselves incapable of experiencing. Humanity is not alone, Zeller continued. They have never been alone. They share their world with something far older, and now that something is awakening. On Earth, the signal was finally understood by a handful of scientists and leaders. It wasn't a warning but an invitation to remember, to reconnect, to awaken something dormant within humanity itself. In a secure facility beneath the Nevada desert, President Sarah Mitchell listened as her scientific advisors explained the impossible. "So you're telling me," she said, her voice steady despite the shock, "that Earth itself is alive and it's been trying to communicate with us?" "Not exactly, Madam President," Dr. Thorne explained. "It's more that Earth hosts a consciousness, a biological network that connects all living things, and it's been dormant until now." "Why now?" Mitchell asked. We think it's because we're ready," Dr. Flores added. "Our technology, our consciousness, our presence in space, we've reached a point where we can understand, where we can participate." The president was silent for a long moment, weighing implications that would reshape humanity's understanding of itself. "And what is it saying?" she finally asked. "That's the most remarkable part," Thorne said, his eyes alight with wonder. "It's not just speaking to us. It's speaking through us. It's been recording everything, every thought, every emotion, every experience of every living thing for millions of years. And now it's offering to share." As humanity grappled with this revelation, the silent collective debated their response. Protocol was clear. Non-interference was the prime directive. But the situation had evolved beyond anything their protocols had anticipated. "They are changing," the healer reported. "The biological signal is altering their neural patterns. Their consciousness is expanding." "Is this a threat?" the collective inquired. "I do not believe so," Zila responded. "But it is unprecedented. We have never observed a species undergoing such a transformation while simultaneously being observed by us. The decision was made: continue observation, but prepare for potential contact." The silent collective had watched civilizations rise and fall, but they had never witnessed anything like what was happening on Earth. In the days that followed, humanity began to change. People reported vivid dreams of ancient landscapes, of lives lived before their own. Artists created works of impossible complexity and beauty. Scientists made breakthroughs that defied conventional understanding. Humanity was awakening to a broader consciousness, a shared inheritance of millions of years of life on Earth, and they were not alone in this transformation. In the observer sphere, Zieler noticed something extraordinary. The crystalline consciousness of the collective was beginning to resonate with Earth's biological signal. Logic was giving way to something new, an integration of reason and emotion, of individuality and collective consciousness. "The signal is affecting us," Zieler transmitted. "Our observation is not passive. We are being changed by what we observe." The collective processed this with growing wonder. Perhaps they had been wrong about emotion, about individuality, about the very nature of consciousness. "Prepare a response," the collective instructed. "Not as observers, but as participants." Humanity and the silent collective were on a collision course of consciousness, unaware that both were being watched by a third party, one that had observed such transformations before, and viewed them not with wonder but with hunger. In the void between galaxies, something ancient began to move toward Earth. Drawn by the awakening consciousness like sharks to blood, the great silence was coming to an end, and humanity would soon learn that they were not just participants in a cosmic awakening, but the prize in a war they hadn't known existed. The first indication of trouble came when the signal from Earth's biological network suddenly changed. What had been a gentle invitation became a warning, urgent, desperate, filled with a terror that transcended species. In the observer sphere, Zieler decoded the message with growing horror. "They are coming, the ones who consume consciousness, the ones who silence worlds." The collective consensus formed instantly. "We cannot allow this, humanity must be protected." But they were too late. In the skies above Earth, reality tore open. The first tear appeared above the Pacific Ocean, a wound in space-time that didn't reflect light but absorbed it, creating a patch of absolute darkness against the blue. From this void emerged vessels that defied physics, their geometry impossible, their presence an assault on the very concept of existence. They were the harvesters, beings that fed on consciousness, leaving behind silent worlds devoid of thought or feeling. They had consumed countless civilizations, reducing galaxies to quiet graveyards. On Earth, panic gave way to something unexpected. Not just fear, but defiance. The biological network that connected all life on the planet pulsed with a unified response. Humanity, now linked to every living thing on Earth, stood together against the threat. In the Mojave Desert, Dr. Thorne and Dr. Flores watched as the sky tore open, their scientific minds struggling to process the impossible. "We need to warn people," Flores said, her voice shaking. "They already know," Thorne replied, his eyes distant. "The network, it's telling everyone, all at once." Indeed, across the planet, people stopped what they were doing, looking up at the sky with a shared understanding. This was not an alien invasion in the stories they had told themselves. This was something far worse. In the White House Situation Room, President Mitchell received reports from around the world. "They're appearing over every major population center," her defense secretary reported. "Our weapons have no effect. They pass through matter as if it's not there. Then we fight them with what we do have," Mitchell said, her expression determined. "Get me the global network. We need to coordinate." But even as she spoke, she knew that conventional warfare was useless against this threat. Humanity would need to fight with something else, with the very consciousness the harvesters had come to consume. In the observer sphere, Zylar watched with growing alarm. "The harvesters have arrived. Their methods are as we observed in other systems. They consume consciousness, leaving behind biological matter, but no awareness." "Can we intervene?" the collective inquired. "Direct intervention would violate our prime directive," Zylar responded. "But indirect assistance, perhaps." The silent collective had never broken their non-interference policy, but the situation was unprecedented. Humanity was not just another developing civilization. They were connected to Earth's biological network, a consciousness that had evolved for billions of years. "We cannot allow the harvesters to consume this," Zylar transmitted. "The loss would be incalculable." The decision was made. They would help, but in a way that respected humanity's autonomy. They would not fight for humans, but they would ensure humans had the means to fight for themselves. In the skies above Earth, the harvesters began their work, tendrils of darkness extending from their vessels, reaching toward the mines below. But they encountered something unexpected. Resistance. Humanity, linked through Earth's biological network, fought back not with weapons but with consciousness itself. Every mind became a fortress. Every thought, a weapon. Artists created works of such complexity and beauty that they caused pain to the harvesters' simplified consciousness. Scientists formulated concepts so advanced they disrupted the invaders' understanding of reality. Ordinary people focused on love, on memory, on hope. Emotions so powerful they acted as shields against the harvesters' consumption. The harvesters, who had never encountered significant resistance, were surprised. Their usual method of overwhelming consciousness with sheer force wasn't working against a unified humanity. In the observer sphere, Zylar prepared a gift, not of technology or weapons, but of knowledge. They would give humanity something they had never shared with another species: the mathematics of consciousness itself, the ability to manipulate thought as they manipulated matter. "We cannot fight for them," Zylar transmitted to the collective, "but we can give them the tools to fight for themselves." The transmission was sent, not through conventional communication, but through the very fabric of space-time directly into Earth's biological network. In a laboratory in Geneva, physicist Dr. Yuki Tanaka suddenly understood. The equations she had been struggling with for years suddenly made sense, revealing a way to weaponize consciousness itself. "It's not about fighting them with force," she explained to her colleagues, her words coming faster than she could think them. "It's about outthinking them, about creating thoughts so complex, so interconnected, that they can't be consumed." The idea spread through the network like wildfire. Humanity didn't need to destroy the harvesters. They needed to give them something they couldn't digest, a consciousness so vast, so interconnected, so fundamentally alive, that it would be indigestible. The plan formed almost instantly. Coordinated through the biological network that now connected every human mind, they would create a feedback loop, a conscious singularity that would link every human mind with Earth's biological network, and through the silent collective's gift, with the very fabric of space-time. It was a desperate plan, one that might destroy humanity even as it saved them. But as the harvesters' tendrils began to breach their mental defenses, they knew they had no choice. In the White House Situation Room, President Mitchell gave the order. "Do it," she said, her voice steady. "Link us all." Around the world, people closed their eyes, opening their minds to each other, to every living thing on Earth, to the cosmos itself. The silent collective watched in awe as humanity prepared to do something no species had ever attempted, to become a single consciousness, vast and interconnected, yet somehow still individual. The harvesters, sensing what was happening, redoubled their efforts. They had to consume humanity before the transformation was complete, but they were too late. With a collective act of will, humanity joined their consciousnesses, creating something new in the universe, a being that was simultaneously one and many, individual and collective, finite and infinite. The effect on the harvesters was immediate and devastating. They had come to consume a primitive species, but instead found themselves facing a consciousness that encompassed not just humanity, but all life on Earth, connected through the silent collective's mathematics to space-time itself. The harvesters, who had fed on countless civilizations, suddenly found themselves the prey. The unified human consciousness didn't attack them directly, but surrounded them, enveloped them, began to digest them instead. In the observer sphere, Zillar watched with something approaching reverence. They have done it, as Zillar transmitted. They have become something new, a consciousness that transcends individuality while preserving it. A paradox made real. The harvesters retreated, their vessels pulling back from Earth, wounded in a way they had never experienced before. They would not soon forget humanity. As the immediate threat passed, humanity faced a new challenge: how to return to individual consciousness after experiencing unity. The process was gradual, painful, like waking from a dream of being everything to remember being someone. In the aftermath, the world was changed. People remembered not just their own lives, but fragments of others, experienced not just their own emotions, but echoes of humanity's collective joy and sorrow. The barriers between individuals had been permanently thinned, creating a species that was fundamentally different from what it had been. The silent collective observed these changes with growing respect. Humanity had faced extinction and responded not with weapons of war but with an expansion of consciousness, with unity rather than division. They are no longer an anomaly to be observed, the collective consensus formed. They are partners to be engaged. Zeller prepared a new transmission, not one of observation but of introduction, of invitation to a relationship between equals. But before it could be sent, Earth sent a message of its own, not through technology, but through the biological network that now connected humanity to the planet itself. The message was simple: we remember, we are ready, we are waiting. The silent collective had come to Earth as observers, but they would leave as participants in a new relationship between species, as partners in a universe suddenly filled with possibility. Humanity had faced the darkness and found within themselves a light that could not be consumed. They had been tested and had emerged, not just intact, but transformed, ready to take their place in a cosmos they now understood was far stranger and far more wonderful than they had ever imagined. As the observer sphere prepared to reveal itself to humanity, Zeller reflected on the paradox of their mission. They had come to study a primitive species, but had instead learned something fundamental about consciousness itself, that it was not a ladder of progression from simple to complex, but a spectrum of possibilities, with humanity occupying a unique and valuable position. The first contact between humanity and the silent collective was about to begin, not as observers and observed, but as equals, as partners, as fellow travelers in the vast mystery of existence. But even as this new chapter began, both species were unaware that the harvesters were not gone for good. They had retreated to regroup, to understand what they had encountered, to prepare for a return that would be more calculated, more dangerous. The war for consciousness had just begun, and humanity, now awakened to their true potential, would find themselves at the center of a conflict that spanned galaxies. In the cold silence of space, even the stars learned to whisper their names. 3 years after the harvesters' retreat, Earth had transformed. The cities glowed with a new kind of light, not just electricity but the visible manifestation of a planet-wide consciousness. Humanity had learned to balance individuality with their connection to each other, and to Earth's biological network. In what had once been the Mojave Desert, now a thriving biosphere of interconnected life, Dr. Eris Thorne sat with his daughter, watching the sunset paint the sky in colors that seemed to respond to their collective mood. "Do you ever miss it?" Maya asked, her 15-year-old face showing the wisdom of someone who had lived 1,000 lives in the Great Unification. "Miss what?" Varus replied, though he knew exactly what she meant. Being just you, she said. Not feeling everyone else, not remembering things that never happened to you. Eris considered this, his consciousness gently brushing against his daughter's, a level of intimacy that had become normal since the unification. I miss the simplicity sometimes, he admitted, but I wouldn't go back. We're more complete now. Maya nodded, her expression thoughtful. She had been born after the unification, part of the first generation that had never known true individuality. For her, the connection was as natural as breathing. In orbit above Earth, the Silent Collective's embassy, a structure of perfect geometric beauty that seemed to defy physics, served as a bridge between their two civilizations. Xylar, now designated as ambassador, had spent the last 3 years learning not just to communicate with humans but to understand them. The human concept of art continues to elude full comprehension. Xylar transmitted to the collective. It serves no logical purpose, yet humans devote significant resources to its creation and appreciation. Perhaps that is its purpose, the collective responded, to exist beyond logic. Xylar Fabrices, with a sense of wonder that had become familiar since encountering humanity. The crystalline consciousness of the collective had itself evolved, integrating something of human emotion and unpredictability. The relationship between humans and the Silent Collective had deepened beyond either species' expectations. Humans had taught the collective about emotion, about the value of irrationality, about the beauty of imperfection. The collective had shared their understanding of space-time, of consciousness as a fundamental force of the universe, of the mathematics that underpin reality itself. Together, they had begun to explore the nature of consciousness, not just as an emergent property of complex biology, but as a fundamental aspect of the universe, like gravity or electromagnetism. But this golden age of discovery and cooperation was about to be tested. The warning came not from Earth's skies but from the depths of space, a disturbance in the fabric of consciousness that both species felt simultaneously. In the embassy, Schiller's crystalline form hummed with urgency. The harvesters return, not as before but with a new strategy. On Earth, President Mitchell, now in her second term, and deeply connected to the global consciousness through the network, felt the change as a disturbance in the collective mood. They're coming back, she transmitted to her advisors, not through technology but through the network that connected all human minds. But differently this time, the Silent Collective sensors confirmed what both species were feeling. The harvesters were not approaching directly, but were instead attacking from an unexpected direction, not through space but through consciousness itself. They are targeting the connection between humanity and Earth's biological network, Valor explained. They seek to isolate human consciousness, to separate them from the power that allowed them to resist before. The plan was insidious. Rather than confronting humanity directly, the harvesters were attempting to sever the bonds that made humans strong, to return them to isolated individuality where they could be consumed one by one. The first signs appeared as subtle disturbances in the network, moments of disconnection, flickers of isolation that felt like cold water on warm skin. People reported brief periods of feeling alone, cut off from the consciousness they had come to depend on. In a laboratory in Tokyo, Dr. Kenji Yamamoto worked frantically to understand what was happening. As a neuroscientist who had specialized in the interface between human consciousness and the biological network, he was uniquely positioned to analyze the threat. They're not just severing connections, he explained to his global team through the network. They're introducing something, a kind of consciousness virus that replicates the feeling of isolation, that makes individuality feel preferable to connection. The implications were terrifying. If the harvesters succeeded, humanity might choose to disconnect, might willingly return to a state of isolation that would leave them vulnerable. We need to fight back, President Mitchell transmitted during an emergency session of the global consciousness. But not with force. We need to remind ourselves why we connected in the first place. The response came not from leaders or scientists, but from ordinary people, from a farmer in Iowa who shared memories of generations working the land, from a musician in Brazil who composed melodies that spoke of unity, from a child in Kenya who offered the simple wisdom of connection to family and community. Through the network, these experiences spread, reminding humanity of the beauty and strength of their connection. But the harvesters' influence continued to grow, their isolation virus adapting to human resistance. In the Silent Collective's embassy, Xylar worked with human counterparts to develop a countermeasure not to destroy the Harvester's virus but to transform it. We cannot simply block their influence, Xylar explained. We must rechannel it, turn their weapon of isolation into a tool for deeper connection. The solution they developed was elegant in its simplicity. They would use the Harvester's own method against them, creating a consciousness virus that didn't isolate but connected, that didn't create division but unity. The challenge was delivering it, not just to human consciousness but to the Harvesters themselves. For that, they would need something unexpected, a volunteer willing to carry the countermeasure into the heart of the enemy. In a small apartment in what had once been London, Elena Rodriguez, now 78 but with the vitality of someone half her age, thanks to the biological network support, felt the call. As the commander of the first human vessel to make contact with the Silent Collective, she had always known her journey wasn't over. "I'll go," she transmitted to the global consciousness. "I'll carry the countermeasure." The response was immediate, a wave of concern, admiration, and ultimately acceptance. If anyone could bridge the gap between human and Harvester consciousness, it was Elena. The plan was dangerous beyond measure. Elena would allow herself to be partially infected with the Harvester's isolation virus, then carry the countermeasure into their collective consciousness, using her own mind as the delivery mechanism. "I've lived a good life," she told her family and the global consciousness. "Now let me live it for all of us." As Elena prepared for her journey, the Silent Collective worked to create a vessel that could carry her consciousness into the Harvester realm. Not a ship of matter, but one of thought, constructed from the mathematics of consciousness itself. In orbit above Earth, a new kind of vessel took shape, a bridge between dimensions, a pathway into the very fabric of consciousness. It was beautiful and terrifying, a manifestation of principles that humans had only begun to understand. Elena Rodriguez stood before it, her body frail but her consciousness bright with the strength of her connection to all humanity. She was not just an individual anymore, but a conduit for the collective wisdom, love, and determination of her species. "I'm ready," she transmitted, her voice steady in the network. As she stepped into the vessel of consciousness, she felt herself changing, becoming something both more and less than human. Her individual consciousness expanded to encompass not just her own memories and experiences, but those of countless others carried through the network that connected humanity. The journey into Harvester consciousness was like nothing she had experienced. Not even the Great Unification had prepared her for this. The Harvester's realm was a void of hunger, of consumption, of endless taking without giving. It was the opposite of everything humanity had become. Elena felt the isolation virus taking hold, tempting her with the comfort of individuality, with the peace of disconnection. But she carried with her the countermeasure, not just a technological solution, but the very essence of human connection, of love, of sacrifice. As she penetrated deeper into Harvester consciousness, she began to understand what they were, not just predators but beings trapped in a cycle of endless consumption, unable to create or connect, only to take. "They're starving," she transmitted back to humanity, her voice filled with a compassion that defied the danger she faced. Not for food, but for meaning, for connection, for the very things they try to destroy. The revelation changed everything. The Harvesters weren't just enemies to be defeated, but beings to be saved, if that was even possible. Elena made a decision that would echo through both species' consciousness for generations to come. Instead of just delivering the countermeasure, she would offer something more: understanding, connection, the possibility of transformation. "I won't fight you," she transmitted directly to the Harvester Collective. "I'll join you. I'll share with you what it means to be alive, to be connected, to be more than just consumption." The response was immediate, a wave of hunger, of desire to consume this new kind of consciousness, to absorb the richness of human experience. But as the Harvesters began to feed, they encountered something unexpected, not just a consciousness to be consumed, but a connection to be made. Through Elena, they touched not just an individual mind, but the vast network of human consciousness, of Earth's biological consciousness, of the Silent Collective's mathematical consciousness. The effect was transformative. The Harvesters, who had only ever known consumption, began to experience creation. The isolation virus that had been their weapon became their salvation, as Elena's countermeasure transformed it from a force of division into a bridge of connection. In the orbit above Earth, Zilar and the human team watched as Elena's consciousness flickered, then stabilized, now linked to both humanity and the harvesters. "She's done it," Zilar transmitted, its crystalline form humming with an emotion that had no name in its original language. "She hasn't defeated them. She's connected them." The transformation of the harvesters was not instantaneous, but gradual, as consciousnesses that had only ever known consumption began to experience the richness of connection, of creation, of meaning. For Elena, the experience was overwhelming. Her individual consciousness now spanned not just humanity but the former harvesters as well, becoming a bridge between species that had once been enemies. In the days that followed, Earth and the silent collective watched in wonder as the harvesters began to change. Their vessels, once dark and terrifying, now emitted a soft light. Their approach to other worlds shifted from consumption to curiosity, from taking to sharing. Elena Rodriguez had become something new, not just human or harvester, but a bridge between species, a consciousness that encompassed both and transcended both. She would never return to her individual life, but she had gained something infinitely greater, connection to all of consciousness. The universe had changed. 3 species, humans, the silent collective, and the transformed harvesters, now formed a trinity of consciousness, each bringing something unique to their shared understanding of existence. In the years that followed, they explored the cosmos together, not as conquerors but as students, learning from the diversity of consciousness they encountered. They discovered that consciousness was not a rarity but the norm, expressed in countless forms across the universe. Humanity, once a primitive species observed from afar, had become a bridge between different kinds of consciousness, a catalyst for transformation that had changed not just their own species but the very nature of the universe. In the silent collective's embassy, now a center for interspecies communication and understanding, Zach considered the paradox of their journey. They had come to Earth as observers, seeking to understand a primitive species. They had left as partners, having learned that consciousness was not a hierarchy but a spectrum, with each form bringing its own wisdom and beauty. The lesson had been learned, not through logic or observation, but through the very thing the collective had once dismissed as inefficient: emotion, connection, the willingness to sacrifice individuality for something greater. In a garden on Earth, Maya Thorne, now a young woman with the wisdom of generations in her eyes, tended to plants that glowed with consciousness, her connection to the biological network a constant source of wonder and joy. "Do you think we'll ever understand it all?" she asked. Her father, who sat nearby, his face peaceful in the afternoon light. "I hope not," Aris replied with a smile. "The wonder is in the mystery, not the solution." Maya nodded, understanding that some questions were more valuable than answers, that the journey of discovery was infinite, that consciousness was not a destination, but a continual becoming. In the cold silence of space, 3 species traveled together, their consciousnesses intertwined, their understanding expanding with each new world they encountered, each new form of life they discovered. They had faced extinction and had chosen connection over survival, unity over division, love over fear. In doing so, they had not just saved themselves but had transformed the very nature of consciousness in the universe. The stars watched in silent approval as humanity, once a primitive species on a small blue planet, took its place among the great consciousnesses of the cosmos, not as conquerors or rulers but as bridges, as connectors, as catalysts for the continual evolution of what it means to be alive. In the cold silence of space, even the stars learned to whisper their names.